Next up, we are going to have a panel focused on actually freshwater as opposed to saltwater, which we've heard a lot about, and oceans. The panel is going to be led by John Friedman, who is with GE Power and Water. John has been with GE for about a decade and is actually also a leader of their global partnership and government affairs. So he has a much broader perspective than the water part of the puzzle. But John, you can fill us more in on your background and then the rest of the panel. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I was here in 2011. This is just a great event. I'm John Friedman, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., where I lead government affairs and global partnerships for GE's water business. GE has 50,000 water customers in 130 countries around the world. And so I think we really have a good position to have a sense of what water trends are going on around the world. And one of the trends we're seeing is increasing scarcity in many places. According to the World Bank, 5 years ago, because of climate change, increasing population and pollution, the world reached a tipping point where demand for fresh water now exceeds supply. And we're seeing this tipping point play out across headlines all over the world. In Brazil, a country with 13% of the world's freshwater resources, the taps are running dry in Sao Paulo. In China, the Ministry of Land and Resources released a study recently showing that in the 200 cities it's monitoring, 60% of them have groundwater too polluted to drink. And here in the US, California is now in the 4th year of its worst drought in the past 500. And the story plays out again and again and again around the world. So what can we do about it? Well, we have 4 experts in different fields of water who are going to share some of their experiences, and I'll introduce them in a minute. Before I do, let's just start with this short video. Are you able to start it? So I really think that frames the challenge that we're facing. And let me tell you who we have. We have Melissa Meeker, who is Executive Director of Water Reuse. It's an association and foundation focused on water issues. She was also appointed by the governor of Florida to lead one of the state's 5 water districts, and before that was a senior official in the State Department of Environmental Protection in Florida. We then have Henry Charabie. Henry is the CEO of RWL, as in Ronald W. Lauder Water. We have John Hanula next. John is a senior vice president in MWH Global. That's one of the world's largest, or probably the world's largest, water engineering and construction firm. And then we have Uli Kappas. Uli has a distinguished career, also working for an engineering firm, Parsons, but is now a founder of a company that tows icebergs to areas in need of water. So let's start with Melissa, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists just for 1 minute to tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds and why they're relevant to the conversation. Then we'll ask them a question or two, and then we're going to open it up to you so that you can ask your own questions. So Melissa, thanks.
Thank you, John. As you said, my name is Melissa Meeker. Currently run 2 organizations. One's a trade association. We have about 500 entities as members of the trade association. Most of them are water utilities or water agencies. Also a lot of universities focused on, obviously, water reuse. And the other is a research foundation that also focuses on water reuse, looking at technologies, trying to bring down cost, reliability of systems, different things like that. Really focused on advancing the concept of using the right water for the right use. So that's really what our organization is about. Me personally, I have 25 years experience in water supply planning and environmental protection, knowing that our water supply demands have a direct impact on the health of our downstream ecosystems. Groundwaters affect wetlands, affect estuaries, affect oceans. So it's all connected, and I choose the water supply piece of that to really focus on.
Henry?
Thanks, John. Thank you for the invitation. As John said correctly, I'm the CEO of RWL Water, a company that focuses on the mid-market. And I heard earlier today, mid-market for water and wastewater projects. I heard earlier today and before, people always talking about, what can we do how do we leave this planet for our kids? I think us here, we can talk about not our kids that, of course, are dearest to us, but we don't have to wait. It's now. And I think the point is that we don't have to wait for phenomenal solutions, but we all are working on currently what we can do. So as RWL Water, we are focusing on small to mid-sized decentralized projects. We talk about an 80,000 cubic meter a day, that's 500 gallons per day, produced water treatment plant in Colombia, where we're taking 90% of that water that used to be deep well injected into the ground and now is reused for palm trees, for irrigation. We talk about the fact that we have a phenomenal company in Italy that takes high organic industrial wastewater from slaughterhouses or chicken farms and produces energy out of that with then Jenbacher GE engines. And so there's a lot of things we currently do that we do not have to wait for and that are extremely important and have solutions right now that do not have us wait and see what the future will hold, but we can really focus on it right now. And just on the last piece, on the produced water piece, we here in the United States, in Texas, we have 50,000, just in Texas alone, 50,000 deep well reinjection wells that have water that can be perfectly reused if we just put on the right technology and the right political framework around it. And that's just an opening of things that I think we can discuss.
Thanks, Henry. John?
I'm a hybrid human being. I'm both an architect and an engineer. And maybe the architectural profession shouldn't have deregulated engineering in the Renaissance, but it gives me an interesting perspective on things. One of my professors told me when I was in school, double majoring, he said, you're going to go into this engineering thing and you're going to learn, right now in architecture, you're learning less and less about more and more until you're going to know practically nothing about everything. And then when you get into engineering, they're going to teach you more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. And I think my approach in straddling those two is kind of somewhere in between, and I've managed to balance that. I'm with Montgomery, MWH, Montgomery Watson Harza are the component names. I focus, and I have for probably the last 12 or 15 years, on kind of the big cities, the big urban approach, because that's where a lot of our problems are concentrated in infrastructure. My group in MWH is called Government and Infrastructure, and it really is code for our municipal practice worldwide. A little bit about Montgomery. We are all about water, with the exception of hydropower, which is kind of a common theme here, because the way we approach hydropower, it's more about the molecules of water than the electrons it produces. It's about water resources. It's about how you efficiently move the water around. We are finishing up the new locks for the Panama Canal right now. That's our big project. And that's kind of what we're about, anything water. And for what I do, it really gives me a great platform to be involved with some of these solutions at an urban planning level down to a facility level and a technology level on how we can, impact some of the things we need to address with what you've seen here today and earlier in the conference.
Thanks, John. Uli will.
I'm a civil engineer. I refer to our profession as civilization engineering. And if you're involved in civilization engineering, you have to be an optimist. I'm an optimist, and I think we're on the threshold, or we're passing first base, and will ultimately pass home plate in terms of grappling with global warming. But it took us 150 years to get here. The current challenge is at 400 ppm CO2, and it's going to take decades to get that under control. But I also believe that Mother Nature is somewhat of a regulator on all of this. And we heard over and over again, we really don't have what I would call a good handle on what's going on in the environment. But I think with our collective efforts, particularly the pervasive undercurrent that I heard over and over, and I certainly agree with, is we've got to do a better job of educating the public, especially our political leadership, because I can get into more details about some of the ideas we've come up with. But I think there is time to grapple with these issues and to address them and save our planet. I have 4 grandsons, so I'm also very interested in this topic, plus I'm an avid trout fisherman, and I can tell you some personal experiences about global warming here in Colorado that I've observed over the years.
Thanks, Uli. So, Melissa, we're going to start with you. We all hear a lot about renewable energy. Is there a water analog?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, John, for the great video. I think that actually took a lot of my talking points. But one of the things that I want to focus on and remind everyone is that we have the same amount of water today that we had when the Earth was created. There is no way to create new water. It just switches in its form. So what we've looked at is really, backing up just a second, as it switches in that form, it's always been done historically by Mother Nature. The water trickles into the groundwater, it's cleaned, it's pulled back up, or it goes up to the ocean, it rains, comes back over, by nature. But with our population growth and with the demands that we have on water supplies, we don't have time to wait on Mother Nature, unfortunately. So we've used technologies, very advanced technologies, to give us better treatment on water supplies so that we can use the right water for the right use. As the video pointed out, there's not a product in this room, on your person, that you're sitting on, or anything else that didn't take water to create. We can't avoid the use of water in anything we manufacture, in anything we eat, or in anything, really, quality of life, trout fishing. We need water to do that. But are we using the right water for the right use? Do we need to use what little bit of potable water we have to create the dye that's in your clothes. We can use a lower quality water. We can use technology to get us to the point where we need to. We can look at a college campus or an Intel campus where they have these huge footprints and figure out ways to recycle water so that, again, you're saving that potable water for the little bit of water we need for potable and using other sources of water, other qualities of water in that avenue. So that's what we're really about, is using the right water for the right use and really taking advantage of the resources that we have that currently we waste, either going to tide through wastewater discharges, into rivers, and making sure that the right water is used in the right place.
And just to frame this opportunity, you know, we have all of this scarcity developing in many parts of the world, and yet you have wastewater as this tremendous resource which can be treated and reused. I mean, it can be perfectly pure water, and yet we're reusing about 3 to 4% of the world's wastewater today. In the US, the figure is about 6 to 8%. In California, 8 to 10. I've seen some figures as high as 13%. So tremendous opportunity there to help address climate change. Very hopeful, actually. Henry, this might have nothing to do with our panel, but I'm going to ask anyway. What leads a billionaire known for the cosmetics industry to start a water company?
Well, because obviously the shampoo doesn't work very well. But so Ambassador Lauder, who I have the pleasure to have been working with for the last 14 years, has always had an interest in water. And so he believed that through his entire career that water is the peace in the Middle East. And he wanted to create a company that does well while doing good. So there's obviously this aspect of everything that Melissa said, that, you know, there's all these opportunities where we can just be much smarter about how we use our water, not to waste this resource, which again, you can have more electricity, you can have more fossil fuels if you want to and all that, but you can never create more water unless you are smart about it. So that was the driver behind it. And as you and many others know, that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was this big acquisition spree that created 3 big giant water treatment companies around the world, which to the normal people on the streets are probably unknown, that are Veolia, GE Water at the time, and Siemens at the time. And so that created a void for what we call the middle market. These are small to mid-sized municipalities and industrial clients that do not fall under the radar of the very large companies because they have such an overhead and such an infrastructure that they cannot act nimbly and cannot offer the financing. And so we came together with Mr. Lauder and came up with a strategy where we acquired 4 companies in different fields and different expertise in order to, you know, fill that void. And I think have somewhat become this global company in the mid-sized market with the focus on using the existing technologies to really do a better job.
Right, but are you seeing actual opportunities to help these small and mid-sized cities address water scarcity?
Oh, absolutely. I think and we discussed it earlier, one of the big mistakes we've made in the past is create these very large, centralized water treatment plants, whether
like
it's fresh water or whether it's desal or wastewater treatment plants. Where we focus on are decentralized, whether it's containerized, packaged wastewater and water treatment plants. For example, we've built the biggest containerized wastewater treatment plant in the world for Camp Victory for the US military in Iraq, which is now handed over, obviously, to the Iraqis. We have built, in 8 months, a 23,000 cubic meter a day desal plant in Cyprus, which are smaller, faster, less power to deliver the water to the customer. So that's the kind of things that we want to do.
So, John, you're hearing Henry talk about decentralized plants. And Henry, I think one of the big advantages of that is energy production. In other words, you don't have to treat the water at point A and then pump it, 50 miles to point B, which is very energy intensive. John, what about that from an energy intensity standpoint? Do you have any thoughts on, is decentralization the way to go? I know MWH Global is well known, of course, for some very large infrastructure projects. Maybe you have a perspective on both.
Well, I'm on the board of USC, and they're doing some really groundbreaking studies right now on this water for power, power for water. Can't separate them. And US, these are numbers from a recent study, 98,000 trillion kilowatt hours produced a year in the US. And it's just under 50% of that produced power is used to either produce, move, or condition water. And you've heard smaller numbers, but when you get in
50, 50?
No,
Or
I'm
15?
talking about
What
40,
percent?
about 48%
40%.
of our power goes back into doing something with water. So, you know, we have to find it and pump it out of the ground and move it. And when it gets to power plants, you have to generate steam to generate more power. If you just look at the pump storage, which is a net producer, we use, I think it was about, the number was about 29,000 trillion kilowatt hours to, 25,000 to produce 29. So it's a net 4, but you use power and you use water to produce power. So you can't separate those. And, you know, when we get into the high level, right, really, you know, we've heard resonating numbers that are undeniable on reduction of surface ice, which will lead to increased sea level, right? Yep. Now, I look at that on the bright side. I'm going, that's the largest reservoir in the world, and we're going to fill it up. I can do something with that. But when you look at it from that perspective, I like the restraining factor, which we're also going to add people. And the projections are we're going to add 2 billion people in cities over the next 20 years or so, and increase the urbanization of the planet to about a point where 70% of the people on the planet are living in urban zones, which really concentrates all this mix of power, water, infrastructure that we have to solve.
Okay. So, Melissa, we can take wastewater and treat it so they can be reused for productive purposes. Henry, we need to treat water near where actually the people are and industry is, so we don't have to spend a lot of energy transporting it. John, you know, energy intensity is a huge issue. It needs to be addressed. Uli, if all else fails, I imagine we can chip off pieces of icebergs and haul them to water-starved areas. Is that what Providence is up to?
Well, let me very quickly, before I go there, tell you that one of the last projects I completed was $1 billion with a B water supply program for the greater San Diego area. And part of that program was the construction of 2 very large reservoirs, which when we started, the people said, hell no, no dams, or damn no dams. But it is possible to permit this large infrastructure need we have to control our planet's warming. And one of the reasons why the folks there decided to spend $1 billion was one of the leading physicists in the area, who's on the board of directors of the San Diego County Water Authority, came up with a great statement that is very useful, I think, to this audience in terms of your education mission. And he said, folks, you know, I know we're in a recession. We really can't afford to do this, but we can't afford not to do it because we're out of water in 2 days when the big one hits, because all their water comes through aqueducts from Northern California, crosses San Andreas Fault System. And he said, nobody knows what time it is, but the earthquake clock is ticking. And it was a unanimous approval. We walked away with a big contract. But I think the same thing is true for global warming. Getting to icebergs very quickly, what is mind-boggling to me, and I ran across this the first time I was in Saudi Arabia 40 years ago developing some water projects, is that 78% of the world's fresh water is in Antarctica. And we have thousands of icebergs calving off the glacier. Once they're in the open ocean, you put a rope on it, it's your property under maritime law. Well, we can haul those icebergs, you heard a minute ago, if we can haul those icebergs to areas of need like Rio de Janeiro, maybe San Diego or LA, then we avoid this tremendous cost and all the CO2 emissions that generate all the power you were just talking about, which is an accurate statement. But what is so neat about icebergs is very high quality water. In fact, you can mix brackish water before you can drink it because it is such high quality water. But when ice melts, you get cold water. Well, I live in Denver. Believe it or not, we use cold water in the summertime to air condition all the downtown area because we use power at night, off-peak, when it's very cheap most of the time, and we cool the water, run it through our central heating system, which is now running, if you will, in a reverse direction to heat exchangers. You can do the same thing with an iceberg. If I can haul it up to Camp Pendleton, for example, I can provide them with all the water and cooling they need to air condition everything. If I can run it to San Diego or Rio de Janeiro, the same thing. The bottom line is, we've estimated, we've done the engineering work in a preliminary fashion, that one iceberg can generate $200 million worth of benefit. And that doesn't include the value of the carbon that has been avoided in terms of dumping that into the atmosphere. And it costs maybe $100 million to tow an iceberg. So depending on your assumptions, you get 100% ROI just for one berg. And there are all kinds of nuances we can play on that. But I'm personally somewhat excited about that prospect. My wife thinks it's a little nutty. Why hasn't anybody done it? In fact, they do it all the time in Greenland, where they tow icebergs away from some of the oil platforms they have out in the sea. But obviously, that's a smaller scale. We're talking about icebergs that are about 100 acres in size. So I think technically it's feasible. There have been a lot of studies along that way, but environmentally, that's another question.
Thanks, Woolley. Well, why don't we open it up for questions, either on the type of water scarcity we're seeing in various places around the world, or on what some of the solutions to the scarcity is. Does somebody have a microphone? I can't see. Okay.
I'm wondering, well, about the water situation. I know that Nestle has an operation in Michigan where they just leased a building, they popped a hole in the parking lot, and that's where Poland Spring and Nestle Pure and a lot of the waters come from. And I think they made $4 billion, around $4 billion a year with that. So I wonder if there's got to be some way that we can reclaim some of those water rights. And my other question is, why we keep putting fluoride in the water when we know it's so toxic. It was one of the greatest hazards of building the atom bomb, and we keep putting it in the water, and we're losing our fertility, and we're damaging our children. So I'm wondering what we can do to make our water purer and more safe so that we don't need to do as much reclamation with our potable water.
Melissa, you respond to the Nestle question, and then we can fight over the fluoride question.
Yeah. Well, again, I do wastewater, not drinking water. So on the Nestle question, again, not at the Nestle level, but a bigger picture. To me, one of the most frustrating things, and it gets back to public education, which we've talked about all day and probably all conference, is that when you talk about sustainability, which obviously is an important issue in this room, that you all believe in very strongly, when I go out to the public and I talk about sustainability, water is not included in that conversation. You have water bottles sitting on the table, you have, I mean, the amount of money that we spend on a bottled water versus what we can do with treatment technologies is astronomical. I mean, there's no comparison in page, but we don't pay for water. What you get for your $30 a month or whatever your water bill is so small, it doesn't provide a value to that resource, which is one of our biggest challenges. That's why we waste so much water. So for me, it's about educating the public so that they see the benefits of really clean tap water. You can fight about fluoride, but use the tap water. Let's go through treatment technologies to use the right water for the right use, and really focus on including water in that sustainability conversation.
I was a history major, so no chemistry here. You guys probably have more technical backgrounds, but I do a lot of reading on the subject, and I would say the consensus scientific view is that the water in the United States and really the rest of the developed world is extraordinarily safe to drink for people of all ages, children, elderly, adults, teenagers. And so there are probably differing points of views on that, but I would say the consensus scientific view is that water is extremely safe. And the concern is not in the developed world, but in the developing world where about 1.2 billion people don't have access to safe water and are getting waterborne diseases. And and then children and the elderly are disproportionately impacted. So that's really the challenge, and these guys can talk about it too, but that I think is where companies like GE tend to focus their foundation efforts, and a lot of Melissa associations and government agencies do as well, like USAID. Does anybody want to comment on that or add to it?
I mean, one of the things, my kids have grown up in the bottled water era, and they kind of look at me when I drink from the tap. When we do industry events, when I go out with competitor firms, we always at restaurants order water from the tap. And it's not a leap of faith in the U.S. We monitor all these constituents in the water so heavily. Our standards are strict. There's not going to be, other than just a real isolated case, something in our municipal treated water supplies that's going to put us at risk in the U.S. And we're fortunate across the country. There's at ACE every year, right? They have their bragging rights. It's kind of like the wine tasting or the tequila taste-off, where the municipalities do blind taste tests on who has the best water. And, I think that's really where the U.S. is as a whole. It's back to what Melissa says, it's education on not only the holistic water supply, but the value of the water and the type of the water, and why the heck are we putting potable water on plants when we don't need to? I told John this before he walked in, because I did this study, and if we need to get to about 50 to 60% of reuse water in some of the cities to fuel the people and the built space growth. So, if I'm building a new high-rise, I'm going to say, anybody raise their hand if we go into some critical drought situation, is your first place to look for a drink going to be in the urinals? I mean, why are the urinals using potable water? Right. And there's a lot of candidates like that. So, we are in a good place. We just need to get better.
Hi. Let me add John?
Can I ask the next
I'd like
question?
to add a comment if I could.
Okay, Uli.
I used to run a thing called the Water and Power Authority for the governor here in this state, and we finance a lot of reuse projects and also water developments and hydroelectric developments. And it became pretty obvious very quickly that the real challenge we have with water is it's not priced properly. And obviously nobody wants to see their price go up, and it's a very hot political topic. I've been involved in rate increases. I serve on a board of homeowners where we have our own water system, and it's interesting. I pay $180 a month for my internet connection and little TV and other things. My water bill is $50 a month. Yet if we want to raise that $10 a month to hopefully conserve some, and you heard about the energy burden that our water systems require, people go ballistic. The farmers typically pay $20 to $30 for a unit of water called an acre foot deep over an acre, enough water for two families for a year. But desalinization is over $2,000 an acre foot. Yet the farmers in Colorado use 90% of all the water that's consumed. California, it's about 80%. So there's a massive disconnect. And if part of the challenge we have, we got to elevate the value of the water. If you buy water in the little bottles all the way from Fiji, and believe me, I've been to Fiji because I like to dive there, these corals are the hobby. I've been to their water treatment plant and water bottling plant. And when you look at the quality of the environment in the urban areas in Fiji, you wouldn't want to drink that water, in my opinion. But yet, they get $1 million an acre foot for that water. Yeah. $1 million.
So there's no question but that water is almost universally underpriced. What does that mean? It means that there's kind of chronic underinvestment in water infrastructure, which adds to the challenge we all face. We have a question in the back.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of water in the air. I just bought an atmospheric water generator. I live in California, so I'm now off the electric grid with my solar, and I'm off the water grid with my water. I make enough for myself to drink and to water my vegetable garden. And it seems like a really good system, but maybe it's just not scalable. Is there a reason that it just seems like it's fresh, it's delicious, and there's tons of it. There's about a 42% relative humidity right now in this room, and that you could just capture, and it's free.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We have 10 minutes left. We want to allow time for more questions, plus I have a couple questions for these guys. So we're going to have about a 30-second answer. Does anybody have a response to that? John?
I can tell you that we use the term decentralized. I think the answer to getting to where we need to get in this, let's just say 50 to 60% reuse, especially in the urban areas where you're going to get a lot of people, you need to have decentralized systems. And what I mean by that, whether it's at the micro level of you having a unit, or whether it's at a facility level where water doesn't leave the site, you reuse it for irrigation, whatever, it still needs to be decentralized off of these massive regional plants.
I think the question is, are these systems that can extract water from air, water molecules from air, are they scalable? So that can they be part of a meaningful solution? I don't know the answer. Henry,
So
do you
yes,
have
I'm actually, next week we have a company called WaterGen that we're looking at that has some very interesting technology, because the key with that is electricity, right? Power consumption. Whether you can have a scalable larger unit that has power consumption that allows you to get it at a point of use, or even with infrastructure, a larger system. So the question here is not feasibility or technology, the question is power consumption.
It's cost.
It's cost. And again, on the topic, I'll be in Israel next week to look at a company like that. So
Henry will report back to
Yes.
you, exchange information. We have another question.
Uli,
There's a woman here. Oh, wait,
Uli,
close the mic.
could you
Okay.
please comment on two things? One's the history of the study of the use of icebergs by the Saudis, the French, the U.S. Navy, and the Ames Ice Water Conference. And secondly, the reason it has not been done at commercial levels up till now.
I think historically, water has been too cheap because the Rand Institute spent over $10 million studying this about 20 years ago, and they concluded technically there's no problem, but water had to cost over $100 an acre foot before this was financially viable. Well, with the next best thing when it comes to water these days of desal at $2,000 an acre foot, I think we've had a paradigm shift in the economics. That's why we're somewhat optimistic that this may work.
Hi. Thank you. My name is DC Cordova, and I work with Wang Ming. Did you have a chance to meet with them at all, any of you? I'll introduce you to him afterwards.
Okay.
So I lived in Singapore for 4 years in the 90s, and Singapore has some of the best water in the world. That was one of the first things they handle. I have a thing about water because I come from Chile, and I was a little girl during a huge earthquake, and I lived without water except drinking water the government gave us for 5 days. The horrendousness of that I can't begin to explain. So I have a water thing. So when I started working with Wang Ming, I began to be approached by dozens and dozens of people that have some of the most amazing water systems, all kinds of water systems. And us in the Solar Valley in China, Wang Ming has created a solar desalinator, a water purifier, and a water heater all at once, all solar. And so who do we go to introduce? It's like I thought maybe there should be a website or some sort of a main place where people can go and give their information. I mean, some of the solutions that people have given me, and I'm not even an expert, but they look simple, they are economical, but it seems like whenever they go to people that can do something about it, they get shut down. There's no place, it seems like, for them to go. And the same thing, this gentleman that just brought it up. So I'm so frustrated because I feel like there are so many wonderful people there with amazing solutions, and where do they go?
Okay.
What happens?
So a couple quick comments, and I'll open it up to anyone else on the panel. First of all, Singapore is a world leader in water policy and technology, and as in so many other fields, they punch way above their weight in water. So absolutely to point out Singapore. I know Melissa has a senior leader from Singapore Public Utility Board meeting with her in San Diego in a couple weeks. Second, the idea of these innovative technologies, it's always a challenge for any new technology to gain traction unless it's developed by a big global company that has the ability to refine it in its labs, to pilot it in the field, and to bring it to market through its channels, sales channels. But there are some opportunities out there to do that, even if you're not a big company. One is GE, for example, GE Water has an advanced technologies leader. His job is to scan the world to look for emerging technologies that he thinks are viable and technically and also have economic potential, and to bring them up to scale. So that's one avenue. The second is there's an organization in San Francisco called H2O Innovation that exists to do precisely what you are talking about, to look for emerging technologies and bring them up to scale. It's a nonprofit organization. Anybody want to add to that? Or
Absolutely true.
another question? Yes. Well, who has the mic? Okay.
Go ahead. Speak loudly. Yes. Speak up.
H2O Innovation, San Francisco.
I'm just curious, what anyone on the panel thinks it would take to create the political will to change the building codes in the United States so that we're not wasting electricity creating potable water, that we're not using potable water for things that don't need potable water. It's not, I mean, it's a really simple solution. It's running more pipes.
Right. Let me take that on, because that's, I think, the 2,000-pound gorilla in the room is the political will. As I said before, I think in the southwestern United States, sooner than later, we will have something, because no politician wants to raise taxes or fees. It's called the drought fee, right? It was God-given, and now we have to pay for it. So, talking about prices, if you are a resident in Manhattan, a place people tend to know, and you are a tenant, meaning you don't own your apartment, you know what your water bill is? Zero. It's included in the rent. By definition, anybody knows anything about economics, we're not going to savor a good that we don't have to pay for. So what does it take? It takes political will. And if I may say, what that means is the people voting for those who change political. And I think what was said earlier by Uli is that people are up in arms when you change and when you increase what is the most sacred resource and increase the cost for that. What does it take? It takes people to actually vote for the right people and be okay with the fact that maybe their electricity or their cell phone bill will not go up, but the water bill must go up, because otherwise we can talk about our children, our grandchildren's future. Right now, as I said earlier, the reuse of produced water in Texas where they don't have water to shower in Midland, Texas, is ridiculous. Okay, so that's something you can do right now.
We have 1 minute. Melissa wants to make a comment. You have 10 seconds.
Just San Francisco, talk about leadership and people stepping up. They just passed the first ordinance in the country which looked at the size of a building, and once over a certain threshold, there's a requirement to do reuse, both stormwater and wastewater for non-potable uses. So it's happening, it's just slow.
Okay, in 5 seconds each, what's the solution to the global water challenge? Uli.
I just wanted to add
4,
that
3.
in Colorado, we recycle our water 5 times before it gets out of state. Most of the golf courses in Denver are irrigated with non-potable water.
John.
Massive reuse in new buildings and incentives for retrofitting existing buildings.
Henry.
Public will to enforce with the politicians to increase the water rates in order to do what John just said.
And Melissa.
Wastewater is not a waste product, it's a reuse resource.
Thank you so much for joining us today.